and you look at portfolio companies today, when you look at the buying patterns, what are you seeing in terms of overall SaaS buying patterns today?
Yeah, I have a very different perspective than Twitter. There is a subset of categories that are doing fine. Let's be clear, they're doing fine. There is a subset that's deeply troubled, and then there's a bunch in the middle where it's just a little bit or a lot harder, and so be it. That's called life, right? But these folks who are saying this is the worst recession since the tulip age in Holland are out of their minds. They have no life experiences, and it's not evenly distributed. And let's talk about a few examples for a minute. But before we even get there, think about folks maybe in your portfolio, Harry, that are selling to healthcare. In the U.S., there's no downturn in healthcare right now. There's nothing. And I can't imagine it's different in the UK. So yes, I'm sorry if you sell only to overfunded startups, you may think that this is the worst recession since 1811. But if you sell to healthcare, and then let's give some others, you don't see any issue. For example, in my portfolio, like let's take a really interesting example, which is B2B e-commerce. Okay. Now, B2B e-commerce, I have two leaders I've invested in, Gorgias, which is #1 contact center in Shopify, and then Algolia, which we talked about before, where about half of Algolia's business is in e-commerce. And interestingly, you can see the future because e-commerce actually peaked early in 2020, and then it fell off a cliff and it hit rock bottom in the beginning of 2021. Okay, it hit the beginning of 2020 and then kind of rock bottom as 2022 came back. But e-commerce rebounded in the second half of 2022. It came back. Look at Shopify's numbers. Shopify at the end of 2022 was not the rocket ship it was at peak COVID, but Shopify has stronger numbers at the end of 2022 than it did at the start. And so when you look at folks like Gorgias, on its own, like it grew faster in the second half of last year than in the beginning. If you look at Algolia, half its business is e-com, half is SaaS. The SaaS folks have multiple impacts, pro and con, but the e-commerce is up, right? So there's lots of effects and they're not even. You and I are both co-investors in a company called Revenue Cat. We're emailing on it. Revenue Cat automates subscription management for mobile. It was a rocket ship. Then in COVID, it blew up. Then it kind of plateaued. And then it reaccelerated at the end of this past year, reaccelerated 2022. And it has its own issues, but there's not a lot of macro issues impacting it. So I'm not saying it's easy out there. It is hard, but go find the segment of your customer base that's winning. Go find healthcare or e-commerce or mobile or some part of infrastructure. MongoDB, Okta, these companies are doing really, really well, right? They're doing really, really well. Get some of that business. So maybe it's not quite the question you're asking, but I kind of quit on founders that say the world's ended. I kind of quit on them.
What do you say to the founders where actually they're doing really well and they're still getting a battering? When you look at quite a lot of the SaaS companies, they're down 20, 30%.
Oh, by the multiple?
Yeah.
Well, I say, praise the Lord, you're private. You know what's not fun, Harry? And I've only experienced this once as a startup executive, but I've seen it in a few investments. It's not fun to be running a public company that's down 70% when your revenues are up. It's really not fun. It's a morale crusher. And you tell the team to ignore it. You tell the teams there will be ups and downs. I did a great interview with Spencer from Amplitude. He was like, we prepared the team for this. Like we said, there'd be ups and downs. I just didn't know there'd be this down because Amplitude's pretty much hit all of its numbers. It's a great one, right? So that's, at least in a private company, you can hide a bit. And it is a gift of being private. You can as long as there's no down round or a lot of drama, you can hide a little bit. And maybe that's not the question exactly you're asking, but it's a benefit of being private is that you can duck out some of these issues if you don't need to raise capital.